Thank you very much for the invitation to come and present for this first webinar in 2026. So I'm going to present an article that was published last year entitled Multi-Actor Co-Creation of Innovative Protein-Rich Appetizers for Older Adults, and looking from the kitchen to a real-life consumer tasting, so the different contexts. So this was an article published with other members of my team, so Professor Anne Santev, Lucie Espinosa-Brisé, and from Institut Lyfe near Lyon, Agnès Gibbereau and Audrey Cosson. So for those of you that don't know, so this is a research institute based in a culinary school just outside of Lyon. And it's where I spent most of my time when I was working on my CIFRE thesis. So I was between the UMR Seafood and the Research Institute of Life. So I was supervised by Professor Anne Santev and also with some supervision in Lyon. And as mentioned, yes, I had my defense on the 1st of October last year. So it's still quite fresh. And the theme of my thesis globally, from which this article is taken, is on the theme of multi-criteria and multi-actor approaches to designing foods that are better adapted to the needs and preferences of older adults. So the focus of the article I will present is more looking at the different actors involved in food creation approaches. And I just wanted to give a little bit of context about the population of my thesis and of this article, which is that of older adults, and why this project really focuses on this age group. Because as I'm sure you know, with age, there can be modifications which can impact food behavior. So as a very gradual, progressive process, there can be psychosocial factors which can impact food habits and food choices. There can be changes in appetite levels as well, together with a progressive decrease in the sensitivity of different sensory capacities, so a decrease in taste and olfaction, as well as the more obvious senses such as hearing and vision. And there can also be difficulties in chewing and with different textures of food. So there are food or processing changes which make this population quite interesting to look at in regards to food design. So this was the population that we focused on for my project and also for the article, how we can design foods which are not only appealing and tasty, but also adapted to different modifications that can come with age. So we have this population between 55 and 75 that we focused on. It's a population which live in their own homes, they do their food shopping, they are in relatively good health, but there might be some specificities to keep in mind when looking at food solutions. So with that in mind, I will move to the introduction of this article. So when thinking about a specific group of consumers, we obviously want to take into account their specificities, and co-creation is a way to integrate specific populations into the process. And there are some different definitions of co-creation, but really the essential idea is that it's a collective creativity, and it's a collaborative approach which allows different actors with different profiles to be involved in different stages of the process, whether that's from identifying what are the different problems, generating different solutions to these problems, how they can be put into place and also evaluated. In the literature, we can sometimes see different terms such as co-design, co-ideation, co-creation, co-development. And in this article, we focus on the term of co-creation, as we're really focusing on generating a product or prototypes that will be hopefully more aligned to the different habits and preferences of our consumers. Because the ultimate objective when thinking about co-creation in a food concept is that it's going to be something then that will be chosen, consumed, and integrated into people's habits. So we see more and more articles looking at food co-creation. So even though the idea of having this creative process with different actors is not new, the analysis of the processes and looking at how to optimize the process definitely seems to be occurring more and more in the literature. So when we focus a bit more on some examples of food design and looking at the different actors in co-creation, co-creation often involves the end users. So the end users in this process are the consumers, the people who will eat. And there are examples in the literature of different groups of consumers. For example, looking at children or adolescents, trying to instill healthy food habits in these populations. They might concern younger adults. And in some examples, there are populations of over 70-year-olds. So looking at maybe more vulnerable populations or with very specific food needs or nutrient needs. And a bit less often, we can see examples of food co-creation involving some other actors. So not necessarily the consumers, but maybe food industry actors or scientific communities, sometimes in the healthcare industry, and occasionally chefs. We can see having these different profiles obviously bring unique knowledge to the process, which can aid in the food creation flow. And another interesting thing when we look at current co-creation research is that a majority of projects use approaches using questionnaires or surveys, and maybe some classic workshop approaches like focus groups. So given the project that I was working on, what we identified was that there wasn't really much information on co-creation with the more transitional aging groups. So older adults, but under the 70-year-old group. And we didn't see much information on what happens when you have consumers just by themselves in a co-creation context, or in a context where you have them working together with these actor profiles. So we thought this could be quite interesting to study to better understand the dynamics involved and the pertinence of co-creation for a younger, older adult population. So when you think about looking at these creative activities, and if you want to try and understand differences in different contexts, then you need to think about how you can evaluate a co-creation process. And as I say in the article, so the subject of creativity, co-creation, it's quite a complex topic. It's multifaceted process. There are lots of different ways in which to view the creative process, and there are different frameworks which are proposed. And for the purposes of this project, it was quite interesting or relevant to use the 4 Ps of creativity as proposed by Rhodes as a way to sort of demark the different aspects and to start thinking about, okay, how could we review this food co-creation process? So I'm sure you're already familiar, but just to briefly go over, we can look at the traits of the individuals concerned in the process. So what are the different characteristics which might aid creativity. We can also think about the press, so that really refers to the social dynamics of the creative environment, and this would be particularly pertinent when you have different group dynamics with different actor profiles, for example. We can also think about the process of the co-creation, so in terms of the divergent thinking of the process, how many different ideas were created, what kind of different ideas are created, and then as well as analyzing the final result of the co-creation, so how pertinent is what has been co-created. And we can see examples in literature using different scales for evaluating creativity of ideas. And we had an example in the work by Casano where they developed some ideas for rice-based dishes, and these were analyzed regarding the adequacy of the ideas, how novel they were, how feasible they could be in a realistic context, and the clarity of the different concepts developed. So in the literature, we can see there are some different tools which exist to evaluate co-creation, but these generally often relate to an idea and haven't really been explored in, let's say, the development of prototypes so much in a realistic context. So this is something that we wanted to sort of push a little bit further. So the objectives for this study were to really look at how does the actor composition impact food co-creation. So if we change the composition, what kind of impact could that have on the process and on the final products that are produced? And then more concretely, so what indicators could we use to evaluate this process? What different things could be relevant and give us insight into the process? And then finally, when it comes to food development, well, the proof is in the pudding. We need to know if what's created could actually be appreciated and enjoyed by our target population. So how does the appreciation compare between a co-created food versus, let's say, a non-co-created food? So these were the main sort of questions that we wanted to explore. And that led us to a study design where we had two different group compositions with older adults versus groups where we mixed the older adults with some experts with some expert food knowledge. So we had culinary experts and those with the dietary knowledge. And the objective of the co-creation was to create a novel vegetarian appetizer, which I'll describe a little bit later, and to analyze this process via different measures. And in a way to go beyond a survey or classic focus group with testing in a sort of a sensory booth context, we wanted to use realistic food contexts. So the co-creation would happen where most food co-creation happens, in a kitchen, and the food will be evaluated in a realistic environment as a restaurant. So to give a little bit more context about this study, the idea was to co-create a novel vegetarian appetizer. So you might wonder, well, why did we choose a vegetarian appetizer of all the different things that we could? So it's important to explain that this project was the continuation of an earlier phase, a study that was done beforehand, where we had some co-ideation sessions to come up with different ideas for a novel, it wasn't even appetizer, like a boucher, like something that could be sort of eaten easily. And it was part of an A&R project called Paticina. And during this part, there were some ideation sessions based on knowledge concept ideation. And from these workshops, we came up with a specification of different characteristics that could be, that would have been appreciated. And this led to the creation with a chef research team of this appetizer. So what you're looking at is a choux pastry, and it's using wheat and green lentil flour, and it has a dairy-based filling which contains wheat and green lentil textured vegetable proteins from a local French source. So the idea was that in this co-creation session, we wanted to have some unusual ingredients that consumers would not be familiar with, to give some opportunity to be creative and use things that they had not seen before. So this is where we had let's say our prototype, our original prototype, baseline appetizer, which then led to as the starting point for the co-creation for things to be further modified as the different workshops progressed. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that at the end if you want any more details about that part. So specifically for the methods relating to this study, so as I mentioned, we wanted to compare two different co-creation workshop compositions. So we had a total of 6 workshops which were carried out in this domestic kitchen that we have in Lyon. So it has everything that your normal kitchen would have, with enough space for participants to move around and interact. 3 of these workshops were composed of just older adult consumers, and the other 3 is the multi-actor group, where we had 3 older adults plus a registered dietitian and a master's level culinary student. And all of these groups were moderated by the same person, and we had the same research chef also as part of these workshops. So in total, we had 27 participants. It should have been 30, but we had a few last-minute no-shows. And so that was a total of 21 older adults involved in these workshops. All the workshops followed the same procedure. So it's a 3-hour workshop, so either all the morning or the afternoon. At the beginning, we had some introductory activities, some warm-up creative activities before we went to the first tasting. So the participants tasted the first prototype that I already showed. And then on Post-its, they wrote the ideas for how they would like to improve or change this prototype to be better adapted to what they would like to consume. Following that first tasting, we then had what we called a variant tasting. So we also developed these 2 extra prototypes that you see at the bottom, where we wanted to give examples of how different sensory attributes could be changed. So we had a green one where we changed the shape, the color, we changed the flavor profiles, we changed the texture profiles to try and limit the participants from being too fixed on keeping, the same characteristics as the original prototype. Following all the tastings, there was then a discussion with the chef as to what changes they would like to make. So with the discussion, we talked about what was feasible in the 1-hour cooking time. And to help with that, we had already bought a large variety of different herbs, different vegetables, different cheeses. And we were just next to a small supermarket. So an intern on the project would run out and buy other ingredients depending on what the group decided. Then the chef would prepare the new version, and also the participants would prepare their own preparations as well, with the ingredients we had available. Then we had the final tasting of the co-created version, followed by any last comments on would they further change any of the characteristics. And then at the end, we had a short questionnaire for the participants to complete. And that took us up to the 3-hour mark. So here you can see a few of the images. So at the beginning, we have some of the tasting and the post-its talking about different ideas, how they would like to change the appetizer, and then the participants, the chefs, actually doing the cooking and preparing different elements, and our research chef, Marion, preparing her version. So what things did we measure for this co-creation workshop? So the first thing that we looked at were the different ideas that were proposed by the consumers during the workshop, so related more to the cognitive creativity of the workshop, so how many different ideas, and a thematic analysis of the different suggestions of the group. We also wanted to look at more of the social creativity aspects of the workshops, as relating to their motivation, how satisfied they were with being able to be creative, and if they thought that the final results were pertinent. We also had, so after the workshop, there was an evaluation of several different criteria relating to the co-created appetizers. So we had criteria relating to the feasibility of continuing to produce this appetizer, how novel or how original it was, how its nutritional profile corresponded to our target population, also looking at the sustainability of the different ingredients, and finally the visual appeal of the appetizer. And these were evaluated by 14 different independent judges with different expertise on these areas. And then a few weeks after the co-creation sessions, we had a consumer study where we wanted to have a selection of the different appetizers and get some feedback if our target consumers actually liked them, and if there were any differences between the appetizers resulting from different actor compositions. And here you can see a few more of the images, or the post-its and the kitchen scene. And at the bottom, you can see the different appetizers resulting from the workshop. So the first one is the prototype, the baseline original prototype. And then you have the 6 different versions where we had sort of different ingredients inside the topping, different sort of decoration of the visual appearance. So I'll go through briefly some of the results that we had. So first of all, looking at the different ideas that participants suggested after and during the tasting of the prototype, how they would like to change or alter this product. So unsurprisingly, the majority of comments were about the visual appearance, about the taste, the texture, so the oral sensory characteristics. So that was fairly similar between both of the groups. And what we did notice, there was some indication there were maybe some slight differences between our consumer group and our consumer plus expert group, where there seemed to be some more suggestions of non-vegetarian or international ingredients and focus on salt when we'd had just the consumers. So adding chorizo or some fish eggs onto the appetizers, or having ingredients that are a bit more exotic, let's say. And then when we looked at the consumer expert groups, we had the dietitian and the culinary student. We had some more ideas, very specific ingredients or techniques, how to achieve a certain texture or a certain taste, which is logical considering the profile of the expert. So we obviously have to be measured in our interpretation, given we had 6 different workshops, but it did seem to indicate that having the experts in the group enabled us to have some more focused, practical ideation during these sessions. Then looking more at the social creativity, the social dynamics of the workshop. So I'm not going to go through these different statements, but these are the different things that we asked the participants. So things relating to general satisfaction, the knowledge they acquired, how they felt they participated in the groups, were they able to be creative, and how did they find the outcome of their workshop. So what we looked at is the mean score of the 3 consumer groups and the 3 consumer and expert groups. And we could see generally that all the participants found the experience to be enjoyable, that they were able to participate sufficiently. We did see a small difference, obviously with our small sample size, that the experts obviously felt that they had gained less knowledge than the consumers, which is logical, as some of the discussions turned to the textured vegetable protein ingredient and what could be like the benefits of having sort of this kind of food in our diet. So that would be coherent with experts already having this kind of knowledge. And we also saw in terms of the outcome that the experts found the final appetizers produced to be less innovative than the consumers. And again, that would be coherent with maybe these kind of foods being less commonly consumed by the 55, 75-year-old population. So they would maybe judge it to be more unusual, more innovative than someone who already works in the sort of culinary innovation. The third indicator we looked at was a multi-criteria assessment of the final appetizers. So for this, we took a mean score from the different judges for the 3 consumer appetizers, the 3 consumer plus expert, and also the prototype, just to have a sort of a comparison with the baseline appetizer. And obviously it's more difficult to compare like the group scores. This metric was much more pertinent when being able to get more granular detail between the different appetizers before moving on to, for example, a selection process. But what we did see as a general trend is in terms of the workability or the feasibility of the appetizers, those produced by the co-created groups were maybe less practical or less adapted to scaling up production, for example. And they were also more original. So the extra sort of touches of different ingredients or the toppings led to maybe more novel appetizers than the original prototype. In terms of the nutrition, the sustainability profile, or the visual appeal, these were relatively similar between the 3 different groups. But this was the metric that we used to select what would be the most appropriate appetizers to move forward into the next stage of the study, which was the consumer liking phase. So we used this metric to have the top rated consumer only and the top rated consumer expert appetizer, as well as the original prototype. So we had these 3 appetizers that were formed to be the starter for a full course meal in our study. So you can see we had sort of different flavor profiles with different ingredients, and these were consumed in a randomized order over a study which took around 3 weeks, where people would come at lunchtime for a full meal. So we had 236 consumers who all consumed the 3 different appetizers, with the age range, as I mentioned before, 55 to 75 years. And it's a real restaurant that we have here in the Institute. We had our chefs working, everything prepared the morning of. Participants would come with their partner or with a friend to replicate a realistic eating environment. And this photograph was taken, I think, for the main course, so they're eating a chunky soup, but before then it was the appetizers for a starter. So we had our 3 different appetizers that were consumed, and we asked them all between 1 and 9 how much they liked the different appetizers. And this is what we found. I'll just say before going on to the means that we had a range of different scores. So there were some who really, really hated the different appetizers, and those who sort of were in the middle, and those who really loved it. But the mean score was quite positive for what is an unusual food, an unusual appetizer. The main thing that we obviously noticed, as you can see, is the 2 co-created versions were significantly more preferred than the initial prototype that was created just by the chef. And we did not notice, there was no significant difference between the 2 co-created versions, although the one created by the multi-actor group was a little bit higher. And we also asked a question, which appetizer would you most like to eat again? And around half of the participants chose this, the final one, the adult and expert appetizer. So I'll just move into the discussion phase of the article. So this study was sort of a novel comparison looking at the actor composition in a culinary context, which certainly when we were designing the experiment was not something we could really find in the literature. And from our sort of initial study, it does seem, yes, that when you include experts into the culinary co-creation process, you can get some more focused recipe suggestions. And for example, here we had more adherence to the vegetarian theme. But on the other hand, older adults might adjust the information they give in the presence of experts. So this is something that has been observed in older adult populations, of not wanting to give socially undesirable responses. So, yes, I want more salt in my food, or yes, I actually want some meat in my food. And we know that also when it comes to selecting different ideas to move forward, this can also be moderated by social influences. So the different actor profiles certainly help the process, but the way in which they can be introduced together might impact the information received. And we know as well that for older adults in a participatory setting, they can often start by giving sort of peer level information, but then they might focus more on what they would want, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean it's very important to choose a population or people who represent your population in the process. And obviously, given the limited number of participants and workshops we have, this obviously tempers some of the conclusions of this study, but for obvious reasons, it's very labor intensive to conduct all these different and resource intensive to conduct these different workshops. So that's definitely a challenge in scaling up the process. Regarding the different indicators that we looked at, so we really wanted to have sort of a holistic look at some different quantitative and qualitative indicators of the process, and to really move beyond just the ideation context, which is obviously a lot easier if you're just sort of having the ideas rather than actually going to the prototype phase. And we can see there are other examples where different foods have been evaluated for feasibility and sustainability criteria. And this is something maybe which could have been further developed. There are lots of different metrics for looking at the sustainability of different ingredients, and if this was maybe a bigger component of the food, then maybe that could have been pushed. But I think regarding the limitations of the product, I think it would have been difficult to go a bit further in that way. And we use sort of qualitative analysis as well to get sort of more insights into what our population was really looking for in terms of modification of these appetizers. In terms of limitations, well, we had a limited number of judges looking at the multi-criteria analysis. So sometimes it's challenging to find people with the right expertise to be able to appropriately judge different aspects. And something I really think could have been interesting if there had been more time or opportunity was to delve more into the role of the chef and indicators, to look at the role of the chef and explore perhaps more in a qualitative way their role in this co-creation, which is really essential in food development, and having a food which not only responds to nutritional or sustainability characteristics, but is tasty, which is ultimately what is going to drive someone to eat something or choose something. And so regarding the final part of the study, this is encouraging that co-creation does promote a consumer appreciation of these novel foods. And certainly at the time of writing, there were very few examples of studies which compared non-co-created to the co-created versions. There is an example, the Lopez-Mel study, where there was a comparison of food packaging that was co-created or non-co-created, and this also showed that having consumer input was beneficial. And as I mentioned before, having chefs in the process is perhaps not as used in the literature as it should be, considering the importance of their role in food development. So I think that's something that is definitely a future perspective for food co-creation. Now, obviously, this was just a one-off test in a restaurant environment, so it doesn't really give us much indication as to the possibility for adopting these novel foods actually as part of the diet of older adults. So that's always a consideration with food development, is how to make sure it sort of can be adopted by your target population. And so just to finish off on the perspectives of food co-creation, with the increase in the literature on this subject, it would seem beneficial to really think about the methodologies being applied and how to measure the process in order to optimize different aspects of the cognitive creativity or the social creativity aspects of this aspect, and really sort of looking at how do different actor profiles impact the consumers, and what's the best way to sort of order the interactions so that you get all the information you need to have the most adapted product. And then obviously to link it more to a long-term longitudinal context, what are the consequences in real life, let's say. And also to have frameworks which can be modulated easily to emerging food trends or emerging health trends that need to be considered for the future challenges in food development. So I just like to finish by thanking all the different partners, all the different people who worked in this project. As you can imagine, it was quite a large scale project with lots of people involved. So thank you to everyone who was involved in that, and of course in writing the article. And I look forward to any questions that you have now, or feel free to contact me at a later stage. Thank you.